Hello, everyone in podcast land. Welcome to this week's episode.
On this week's episode of the podcast, we talk about Elon Musk making some more changes to Twitter, including his CEO slot. We talk about Apple canceling some of their products and others getting delayed.
And we talk about base editing, a breakthrough in cancer treatment. Topic number 1. Elon might have voted himself out of Twitter. Now, last episode, we talked about how Elon came out with new rules around banning accounts that link to outside platforms like a Mastodon, like a Facebook. I think maybe even Linktree was brought up in that. And people were very upset by that. A lot of people were quoting a past tweet from Elon where he said, the acid test for any two competing socioeconomic systems, which side needs to build a wall to keep people from escaping. That's the bad one. And they're quote tweeting that because Elon is essentially building a wall around Twitter. He says, okay, hey, if you're on Twitter, you can't talk about any other platforms. You can't link to any other platforms. If you're on Twitter, only talk about Twitter. Nothing else exists. Otherwise, you're going to get kicked off. So he's creating walls around his platform. So people are saying, hey, Elon, this is a little bit hypocritical of what you said before. But, that happened over the weekend. And then since then, the whole policy page that said Twitter accounts would get banned has disappeared. So in typical Elon owning Twitter fashion, there was some controversy. It blew up in the Twitter cycle. And then within 24 hours, it's now disappeared. And we're back to where we were before this, Twitter storm. But also on the weekend, he posted a poll. And, he's posted polls numerous times about, maybe selling stocks, about reinstating accounts. But this poll was about, should Elon step down as the head of Twitter? He said that he will abide by the results of the poll. And, thinking back to a previous episode of our podcast, this kind of reminds me of, I don't think it was this year. I think it was last year. He asked, should he sell Tesla stock to donate to world hunger? And then obviously everyone's like, yes, he should do that. He should definitely donate to world hunger. And then documents came out later on saying that, oh no, by the time he held the poll, he had already sold the stock. And he was kind of making it seem like, oh, whatever the people decide is what's going to happen. And, if you think I should donate money, then I'm going to donate money. I'm a man of the people. Well, no, he actually sold the stock already. And this was more of like a media stunt.
Yeah.
So that's what this reminds me of. So he held this poll and he's making it seem like, the people have a say. I'm a man of the people. And over 57.5% of votes said yes, which means according to this poll and in this post, Elon will step down as the head of Twitter. Even though we knew at some point this was going to happen, we didn't think that, Elon would be at the helm forever. But I guess my question to you, well, 1, did you vote in the poll? 2, do you think that if it said no, Elon would have continued to stay on as a head of Twitter? Or do you think that he was secretly planning, maybe he already had someone in mind? He's like, hey, I'm going to step down within the next couple of months. Let me just put this poll out so, people can have a say and they can feel like their voice is heard. So did you vote? Do you actually think that Elon is being honest where he's saying, whatever the poll says, I'm going to do, even though he might have already made up his mind?
No, well, yeah, I didn't get a chance to vote. And I didn't actually even know the poll happened. You actually sent it to me and I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting. Kind of crazy considering I think you sent me the results of the poll like right after we did our last podcast or soon after it.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, these things keep changing so quickly. And would he have stayed on if the poll went the opposite direction? Something tells me that maybe Musk enjoys the constant changes at Twitter. Like it was always clear that he really liked Twitter and he enjoyed being on Twitter. And I think the idea of, I think this can go for pretty much anybody, having the ability to change and shape a platform or something that you really like would probably be kind of fun. Like I could imagine if Valve just gave me the keys to the Steam Deck and say, hey, do whatever you want. I'll be like, yeah, okay, awesome. And I'm sure a lot of people probably wouldn't be happy about it because I'd be making decisions that maybe doesn't appeal to everybody. But at the same time, though, his takeover of Twitter has been a disaster. Like it's been, like you mentioned, a decision here and then a reversal of that decision a few hours later, and then another decision and then a reversal, and then another decision and then a reversal. So nothing was consistent. No, none of the decisions that were made were even all that good. There was no respect of the employees or other executives that were there. So yeah, it was kind of weird. It doesn't strike me as anyone who has experience being a CEO of a company would operate a company the way that he did. So I really don't know what his end goal was or if he was enjoying it at the time. But yeah, hopefully, he goes with these results, and hopefully maybe he's already begun the search before the results even came in. I wouldn't be surprised though if he expected the results to be different because first of all, and I think this is a criticism that's been thrown out there in the past that I think is actually kind of interesting. Anytime he does these polls, it's on his Twitter account, not on as the CEO of Twitter, not on the Twitter front page. So it's essentially advertising to his base of like, hey, what do you want? And a lot of times when he posts these polls, he gets favorable results to him and his opinions and his agenda essentially, which makes sense because he's speaking to the people who specifically decided to follow him.
Hmm.
This poll, even though I think there could have been an opportunity where he thought he was going to be like, oh, he was going to get votes of, oh yeah, we want you to be CEO. You've made all these changes. You've brought back all these banned accounts. Plus, we're fans of you. Yeah, be CEO. And I think the reason why that could have been possible is the poll wasn't as one sided as I thought it would be. Like I was for sure that the vast majority of people, would want him out, but it was like a 50 to 40% kind of shakedown. Like it wasn't
Yeah,
a huge
not a
difference.
huge difference.
So yeah, I could have seen that maybe he thought it would have went the opposite way. So maybe he hasn't started looking yet. And maybe he won't. Maybe he'll just ignore the results of the poll. He's done that in the past. But yeah, I would like to see someone else step in, someone who knows how to manage a social media company, and be respectful of the people that are working there. What that looks like, I don't know. I mean, do you have any idea of what a CEO of Twitter should look like? Maybe what is a decision they should make? Maybe first and foremost. I mean, I would love the job. If Elon wants to give me the job, I'll take it in a second.
um, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, well, yeah, one, respecting your employees and treating them well and not expecting them to work over the weekends during the holidays. But I think the most important thing is something that you brought up when you're saying, like, okay, 1 second they make a change and then a few hours later they change back and then okay they're making another change and then change back, like have a clear direction of what you're going to do with the platform, of features you're going to implement, and then stick with those.
Hmm.
And it shouldn't be, just, a fly by the seat of your pants. Okay, I thought of this. Let's implement it, even if it breaks some things. And then, we're going to roll with it. And then as soon as people dislike it, we're going to roll it back. Have a plan, what you want to do, things that you want to accomplish, and listen to your employees, listen to the people around you, the people that work for your company that have committed to this hardcore Twitter. Listen to what they have to say, take some input from them, and then don't just rush to implement things,
Hmm.
right? So figure out, okay, what are the features we want? Figure out the best way to implement them, take time implementing them. And then once they're implemented, don't roll it back as soon as you get a little bit of pushback from the community, or as soon as you get a little bit of, oh, we're not happy with this, or how could they do this? This is the worst decision ever. Hopefully, with taking time to implement things, you have like, okay, we're deciding to implement this for X reason, or we're deciding to implement this for Y reason or Z. And because you've taken your time and you've planned it out and you thought it out, you're not so quick to change as soon as there's a little bit of negative press around it.
Yeah.
So I think the two most important things is respect your employees and have a plan and follow through with that plan. Because it seems like Elon doesn't have a plan. It seems like he just wakes up, he has a fever dream and he thinks of something and like, oh, that'd be a good idea, and
Yeah.
then just implements it. And it's like, never mind, I want to do this instead. And then he implements that, and then he's just bouncing around because it's like, well, he's at the head of this company. the social media company, he can do whatever he wants, and he is doing whatever he wants, but what he wants to do changes so frequently. So I think, yeah, like respect your employees, have a solid plan, and take time implementing that plan, and don't just, do things on a whim. I think that's what a CEO, and I don't even think it needs to be someone who's experienced with a social media platform, just someone who's experienced with planning.
Mm. Well, do you think there's any chance they bring Jack Dorsey back?
No.
Mm.
I I mean, yeah, there's a chance. Definitely there's a chance, especially with how friendly him and Elon are, but I don't think that's the right decision. Because even when Jack Dorsey left, he was a CEO, he was the founder, but then he was never around. He wasn't involved in the day-to-day stuff. He was
Yeah.
off taking, silent retreat vacations at meditation institutes. So if you put Jack Dorsey back in charge, well, okay, it's just going to be almost the opposite problem of Elon. Elon is he's too involved. He's making too many changes here, like every other second. And when Jack Dorsey was the CEO, he wasn't involved enough and he was absent, and they weren't able to implement changes because he wasn't around. So, yeah, there's a possibility he could be implemented as the CEO again. I don't think it's the right decision. I don't think it's going to fix any of the problems they've been having recently.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, especially now with Twitter's staff being cut by more than half. You kind of need a CEO that's willing to take the reins and kind of steer the ship. And like you mentioned, in a solid direction, not go down a road and then travel back and then go down a road and travel back again. You kind of have to pick a direction, stay in that lane, and stick with it. And even if you want to break it out in terms of, okay, we're going to test these new features or these new ideas in like a beta program, kind of like they did with Twitter Spaces and Twitter Blue originally, the original Twitter Blue, not the new one. Um, which is funny to think that the original Twitter Blue was, even though there was almost nothing to it at the time, there was more testing to that than there was to this new Twitter Blue that launched and relaunched over and over again. So yeah, maybe there needs to be someone that does that, and maybe if Jack Dorsey isn't willing, or at least it seemed like he wasn't willing to be involved in the day to day of running a company, maybe that's not the best choice. So yeah, who knows? Hopefully we get some new eyes in on Twitter and kind of stabilize the ship.
Yeah, ship definitely needs some stability. All right, our second topic of the day: Apple has canceled their M2 Extreme chip. For quite some time now, Apple has been working on a Mac Pro update. I mean, since they released their M1 processors, everyone's like, oh, they're coming out with the Mac Pro, coming out with the Mac Pro eventually. They're working on the Mac Pro with M2 Pro chips, M2 Ultra chips. They were supposed to have a M2 Extreme chip, which was essentially two M2 Ultras, which would essentially be four M2 Max chips fused together.
Mhm.
With some of the specs that were talked about, it was supposed to have up to 48 CPU cores, up to 152 graphics cores, up to 184 gigabytes of memory. So very powerful, powerful system. But one problem and one reason why it's being scrapped is because Apple says it would be too much to make, be too much to manufacture, and that would also mean it'd cost too much for consumers. They're saying it would probably cost around $10,000 American, and that's just like the base level version without any upgrades. So, a very, very expensive computer, especially for Apple standards, or I guess even for Apple's standards, an expensive system, and you wouldn't really be able to sell it to people, right?
Mhm.
Like maybe okay, some production studios and maybe some music production and film production, but other than that, this isn't something that your everyday user would buy. And I mean, everyday users buy expensive stuff from Apple, but like $10,000 entry level, not that expensive. But they are still working on the Mac Pro. It's supposed to come with an M2, Pro, Max, or Ultra variation. No M2 Extreme for now. They're working on a Mac Mini also. I mean, since the Mac Mini came out with the M1 inside, they were apparently working on one, a redesigned one forever. We still haven't seen one, but there's supposed to be one coming this year with an M2 chip inside, with an M2 Pro chip, possibly an M2 Max chip, but it's probably going to have the same design. There's been rumors that it's going to be a redesigned model, but it looks like they're going to stick with the same aluminum unibody design that they launched the M1 chip with. And I don't mind that. I actually kind of like that design,
Hmm.
right? And hopefully that because it's an old design, there's nothing new to it other than the chip inside. Hopefully that means that they don't jack up the price to say, oh, we all this research and development, manufacturing a new enclosure, and we put this port, and we put that port. Hopefully they don't do that. There's also M2 Pro, M2 Max, 14 and 16-inch MacBooks coming out, possibly in April. It's been over a year since we got the M1 Pro versions. There's supposed to be a high-end iMac coming, but I mean, once again, that was supposed to come out this year, supposed to come out last year. Still haven't seen that. There's also rumors that the iPhone SE 4 has been postponed. And this is kind of one that people have been looking forward to for a while. It's supposed to be modeled after the iPhone 10R, which means it finally gets an all screen design. It moves on from the iPhone 7, iPhone 8 design. It's going to be bigger, possibly use either Face ID to unlock or Touch ID on the power button because they'll be getting rid of the forehead and chin bezels. It's supposed to have a 6.1-inch screen, either LCD or OLED, which will mean it's more expensive. The new design, bigger screen, possibly Face ID. And it's supposed to launch in 2024 now. I think originally it was supposed to launch in 2023, but I guess manufacturing constraints, they're coming out with new Mac Pros, they're coming out with a bunch of new devices. So it seems like the iPhone SE4 has been pushed back a bit. And just one thing on the size of the SE4, they recently canceled the mini iPhones. Those were I want to say polarizing, but some people really like the size. Some people didn't like the size at all. But they canceled them because not enough people bought them, I guess, to meet their bottom line.
Hmm.
And they recently came out with the plus size, so on the other end of the spectrum. So this is a 6.4-inch screen on a regular iPhone. But it seems like, and from the numbers that have come in so far, it seems like those phones aren't doing as well as they expected to. They're not selling as many units. So it's interesting that with their new SE phone, they're not going with a smaller size, like possibly a mini. They're not going with a bigger size, the plus. I mean, they just came out with it, so they probably wouldn't, but they're going with that 6.1-inch size that, kind of tried and true form factor. That seems to be their most popular size. If you look at their base iPhones, whether it's the 14, I guess we're at now. If you look at the base iPhone in the 14, if you look at the 14 Pro and possibly this new SE phone, all coming at 6.1 inches, it seems like that is the standard size for iPhone. So I guess from all of that, what are your thoughts on this rumored M2 Extreme, this Mac Pro that we're supposed to be getting? And what are your thoughts on the iPhone SE4 being postponed?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It really makes me wonder if the manufacturing issues in China right now are starting to affect future products, and make it maybe difficult to bring those to the market, as well as the chip shortage that still exists, unfortunately. But also, it makes me wonder if that product was really ever necessary to begin with. I mean, we talked about the M1 Ultra being so ridiculously powerful that even people who have full production workloads were like, yeah, you know what, the M1 Pro is enough for me. The Ultra is great, but I'm not really getting much out of it. And yeah, so maybe we're just at a point now where the M1 Max or whatever super chip they decide to come out with going forward doesn't need to be the four chips pasted together that they originally designed. But at the same time, this comes back to what we were talking about last podcast with Tesla about how they have all this hardware and software built into their vehicles that they can just decide to use it for a new feature and give you an update down the line. These M1 and M2 chips, these Apple Silicon chips, are designed to be able to, with their Infinity Fabric, to be able to join together. So the fact that it's not happening now, unless they significantly decide to change the design of these chips going forward, whenever it does become viable to combine four of these chips together, it's only going to be even more impressive because we could either be doing it with M2s or M3s or M4s. So the performance gains we see might be absolutely something mind blowing. With the Mac Pro, though, I was always skeptical of the Apple Silicon Mac Pro for a couple of reasons. One, the main reason people need Mac Pros is for compatibility, and that is both software and, more importantly, hardware compatibility. Being able to use things like graphics processors or anything that would connect to a PCI Express slot, and those expansion bays that the original Mac Pro and the current Mac Pro that is still running Intel was designed to do, and something that, if people just wanted a really powerful computer, they could have got an iMac Pro. But that wasn't enough. You needed that modularity. And Apple Silicon has proven that Apple's proven with Apple Silicon that they have no interest in modularity, to the point where I was very critical of the Mac Studio having removable SSDs that you can't remove. If you tried to swap them out with another one, it would just brick the machine, which is so stupid. And if that's the kind of design that they want to go forward with, this, oh, okay, you can only get what you bought from the factory. You can't upgrade the storage after the fact, even though the storage is removable. What's the point of having a pro machine that does that? That's not really all that pro to begin with. So yeah, there's the combination of, the fact that the Mac Studio has this really powerful M1 chip available in it, and it can already do so much, and the fact that a pro machine running Apple Silicon probably won't be any more modular than the Mac Studio already is, really
Mm.
begs the question as to why it needs to exist. Now they are saying it's still going to come, but why, I don't know. Especially if these updated M2 chips also come to an updated Mac Studio, it would just kind of be a redundant machine at that point. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see what Apple does if they just cancel this project altogether. I wouldn't be surprised, or if they do bring it out, maybe they do make it the flagship device where you can actually change out your storage, which is crazy to think that that would be a feature, and add maybe like a GPU or something like that to that machine. Who knows? I doubt it, but who knows? Maybe that's something they could do to differentiate the two. As for the SE, I mean, it's a little disappointing considering the fact that I think that's a really sought after device. The SE, especially the fact that it could be getting a redesign. The SE has been using an old design for a long time now. It's been raising in price. It's now 429 US dollars. I'm assuming this new version is going to raise in price as well, but I imagine the updated design would be a great win for a lot of people who wanted a more budget phone from Apple. So the sooner that comes, I think the better. Uh, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, because if they delay it too long and we get an iPhone 15 that is using an updated chip, I don't think they can get away with putting the iPhone 14 chip in an SE, because that chip would be 3 years old at that point. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, and that kind of changes the whole dynamic of the SE. The whole point of the SE was like, yeah, sure, you're getting a dated design. With even with the XR design, it would still be dated, and you're not getting the best specs in terms of screen or RAM, but you're getting an almost identical CPU, just a little bit underclocked to what the flagship iPhones were getting, and that was the big value proposition. And if they can't even bring that to the table, it kind of just deflates the whole idea of the SE to begin with, especially with something like the Pixel 6a, which I know isn't really that much of a competitor because it's Android and not Apple, but that device doing so well in terms of flagship specs and a great camera. So yeah, it's I think it's a tough. These are tough waters for Apple to navigate. I don't think they've been in this position where they're struggling to get products out like this, as far as I can remember. And yeah, I think they're going to have to be creative with marketing in terms of when these products actually come out.
Yeah, I think they'll definitely have to be creative. I'm not worried about Apple being creative with marketing. But I am worried about the prices.
Hmm.
Especially the SC4, as you mentioned. Like the SC prices have gone up recently, and that's without any design changes. That's without anything new really, other than the chip that they're putting inside. So the fact that they're raising the prices before a design change, and now they're going to do a design change, I am worried about what the budget, the quote unquote budget iPhone is going to cost, and what kind of price that's going to be at. I think they should have done the change a long time ago in terms of, it's 6.1-inch screen, uh, getting rid of the forehead and the chin bezels. But I mean, whenever it comes out, I'm sure it will do well.
Hmm.
I'm sure it will because it's going to. I mean, it's supposed to be the cheapest iPhone. I mean, that's the thing. If they enter it at the price of the minis of what they used to be, it will be the cheapest, but it will still be way more expensive than it should be, considering it's going to have an iPhone 10R design. And I guess at that point, we'll be at the 15, possibly the 16,
Hmm.
right? But I don't know. I think whenever it comes out, it's going to do well. But it's just, okay, how much is Apple going to squeeze out of their customers to get that phone?
Well, I was just going to ask, do you think Apple gets away with using a variation of the A15 for the SE and maybe even the base level iPhone 15s a third year in a row?
No, no,
Hmm.
definitely not.
So do you think then the SE would have to have an A16 at the very least?
Well, okay. I could see them getting away with the A15 for the iPhone SE.
Hmm.
I don't see them getting away with that for the 15. I
So,
don't see them getting away with the same chip in the iPhone 13, 14, and 15,
mhm,
especially since I don't think there's supposed to be any design changes either.
yeah.
Right? I mean, maybe USB-C, but even then, that's not enough of a change to say, hey, we're just going to put the same chip in this phone. Because then at that point, I would assume that they would have an A16 chip to put inside or I guess, no, what are we, 16 now?
Yeah.
I guess they'd have an A17 chip to put in the Pros. Because I definitely don't see them reusing chips for the Pros.
Mhm.
I definitely don't see them. So then you're gonna have, okay, an A15 in the base phone, and then an A17 in the Pro phone. That's too big of a difference, in my opinion. I think people would revolt. Even the loyalists of Apple fans would revolt at that. Right? I could see them doing it for the SE line
Mhm.
if it is a substantial enough price difference, right? If they, let's say, keep the price the same as it is right now after the recent price hike, and they're like, listen, we want to keep this phone cost effective. We're giving you the A15, which is still a good chip.
Mhm.
I could see them doing that, and I would be perfectly fine with that. I'm sure people would be perfectly fine with that, even though the SEs have typically had the newest chip that Apple has to offer. But if it has an A15, I feel like people would be fine with that. Whatever the next chip is, though, for the base iPhone 15, that has to get an upgrade over last year. Yeah.
So I guess we could see something like the SE getting the A15, the 15 non-pro getting an A15, getting an A16, and then the 15 Pro models getting an A17. Oh my goodness, these numbers.
It's
An
difficult to
A17
keep
chip.
up with. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
know. Yeah, I think you're right. That makes sense. But then they really have to be careful with how much they raise the price of the SE because the whole idea of the SE is like, oh, you're paying less for the same chip. But now if you're paying similar amounts because what the base level 14s start at $800 US. Right now the SE starts at $430. So there's a pretty big difference there, but if they start raising that price, then it could maybe seem like not worth it to a lot of customers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially because the last year's model phone will be floating around out there, right?
Yeah.
So if it's like,
That's a
hey,
good point. Yeah.
let's say next year they come out with the SE and it has an A15, but they bump the price up to $600. But the iPhone 14s are going to be floating around out there. They're going to have the same processor, the same screen size, but a newer design, possibly, better battery, better, or definitely better camera, right? And it's probably going to be around $600 to $700. So at that point, it's like, if they continue to raise the price, and it's like, why bother get an SE? The whole
Yeah.
reason for getting one, it's the cheapest, considerably cheaper than the other iPhones, and it has the newest chip. Well, if it doesn't have the newest chip and it's not considerably cheaper, then why bother get it?
Yeah. I I mean, I think that's the perfect point because to your point, I've been just looking at like other phones that Apple's selling right now. And right now, you can get you brought up something important there too, the camera. That's something that really needs to change with the SE model because it's not very good. compared to the rest of the lineup. You can get an iPhone 12 right now with dual cameras, much better cameras than the SE, for $599. So that's what, like $170 more than the current SE for a astronomically better phone in terms of design and camera and just features in general,
Screen and
MagSafe screen.
usability. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a much better device for not much more. And there's still going to be iPhone 13s when the new ones come out. There's still going to be iPhone 14s when the new ones come out. So yeah, raising the price of an SE while keeping an older chip and an older design might, spell doom for that lineup altogether, which is probably why it was delayed. Maybe they just are trying to find a hard way to make that device or that product compelling going forward.
Maybe, yeah. And for the Mac Pros, I mean, maybe wishful thinking. I think there's still going to be modularity to them. I don't know how much. I mean, as you said, maybe it's just the SSDs, which is, I mean, it would be a huge upgrade for Apple's. The fact that you can replace an SSD yourself. But I think that we might even see modularity with the GPUs, even if it's just Apple Silicon GPUs. So it's not, okay, you can't buy an AMD GPU, you can't buy, a NVIDIA GPU to put into your Mac Pro, but you can buy the different levels of GPUs that Apple produces.
Mhm.
So from anywhere from, well, I don't know, 74 cores to 152 cores, and you can buy those and implement them yourselves. It would make sense if they could do that with RAM also, because I mean, it's RAM. It's not like it's Apple custom design RAM. But I mean, I guess part of the whole Apple silicon architecture is the RAM is, so heavily implemented into it. So I think there will be some modularity. I don't know how much. I'm hoping for a lot. Probably
I,
not going to get a lot.
I honestly think that would be a cool idea. It's just it makes me wonder how they would do that because so yeah, you're right. Maybe they could do a thing where like, okay, M2 Extreme doesn't exist yet. But or M1 Extreme, M2 Extreme doesn't exist yet.
M2
But
Extreme.
you can get a Mac Pro now, and when the M3 Extreme comes out, you can pop out your M2 Pro and you can pop in an M3 Extreme. And if they can do something like that, that would be really cool. But to your point, the way that these Apple Silicon machines work is that the storage and the RAM are so integrated into the chip that sure, maybe storage can be separate. They've worked on that with the Mac Studio. Would it just be a situation where you're literally just taking out 90% of your computer to replace it for another, which is still kind of cool. I mean, Framework does that, right? You can take out the whole motherboard with the chip and everything and put it in a new board. Maybe they can make it easy for customers to do that going forward. I would just imagine it would be like buying a whole new computer regardless, and you'd just be keeping the enclosure. But I don't know, could be cool.
Could be, yeah. There's still hope for Apple.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, our final topic of the day. This news story has kind of been circulating a bit online, but base editing as a form of cancer therapy has made some huge gains recently. Now, the story that's been circulating is that a teenage girl received this groundbreaking treatment, this brand new form of treatment, and 6 months after her treatment, she is completely cancer free. The cancer is undetectable. Now, in May of last year, this girl, Alyssa, she was diagnosed with T cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is essentially your T cells in your body. They're supposed to be your body's defense mechanism, their defense system. They're supposed to seek out viruses and illnesses and then destroy them. But for this girl, Alyssa, this form of cancer, her T cells had actually become dangerous and grown out of control and become cancerous. Now, she tried other forms of cancer treatment. She tried chemotherapy and bone marrow transplants to try and regrow her immune system, but they were unsuccessful and they were out of options. And in comes this new treatment, base editing, which is actually invented 6 years ago, but it hasn't been tried on humans yet. And basically, how it works, your bases are the building blocks of your DNA. And what base editing allows scientists to do is it allows them to zoom into a precise part of your genetic code and alter the molecular structure of just one base. And the doctors behind this treatment are able to create a new type of T cell that was able to hunt down and destroy Alyssa's, the 13-year-old girl's. It was able to hunt down and destroy her cancerous T cells. And after they wiped out all the cancerous T cells, they then gave her a bone marrow transplant in order to regrow her immune system. And because of that, as I said, 6 months later, after that treatment, she's cancer free. Cancer is undetectable in her system. Now, she's the first human trial of this. She was the first human to, receive this experimental treatment, this experimental therapy. But aside from cancer, there's also, a vast majority of other illnesses and viruses and diseases that can be treated by base editing. Things like sickle cell anemia, high cholesterol that runs in the family, blood disorder called beta thalassemia. So there's plenty of diseases and things that can be treated by base editing. But the fact that, this girl tried everything else and this new treatment worked for her, I think it's a huge breakthrough for science. And, we usually talk about just tech, phones, gadgets, cars, that sort of thing. But this is technology, right? This is a breakthrough in technology, a different form of technology than we're used to talking about here, but still a huge breakthrough. So I guess I sent this article over to you a bit ago. I think you had a chance to read over a bit, but what are your thoughts on this groundbreaking treatment?
Yeah, yeah, it's just awesome to see and awesome to hear. I mean, the idea that this cancer, this particular leukemia, was resistant to any other form of treatment. So kind of had to think outside the box and using CRISPR and base editing to kind of cure the cancer, or at least try to see if it would work. And all signs showing that hey, the cancer is undetectable at this point is a massive breakthrough. And the interesting thing is, this is kind of like a swerve from the initial ideas of using CRISPR and Cas9 to kind of treat cancer. In the past, there was always this thought that in your DNA, there's this protein, the P53, I believe, that's supposed to scan your DNA of that cell to see if anything is misbehaving, and if it is, it's supposed to trigger that cell's ability to no longer reproduce and kind of just go off and die. And that's one of the main malfunctioning of that particular protein is one of the main causes of cancer, right? A malfunctioning cell, the P53, doesn't bind to the DNA, and then that cell is allowed to replicate and replicate and replicate. And, that cell that's damaged and should have, not continued is now turning into a cancerous mass. So the original idea was, hey, you could use something like CRISPR, you could even use messenger DNA or RNA to reinstate that P53 gene in that cell and potentially, cause that cancerous cell to go off and die. It's something similar here, but in a completely different direction. Actually, in a lot of ways, a more difficult procedure than traditional CRISPR gene editing, where I think what they had to do here, the solution that they engineered, was a lot more invasive than generally just splicing in some new information into the DNA. I think they had to actually bring in whole new cells into the body. And yeah, it's just a really interesting thing to see and really awesome. The idea of, okay, this could be not just a proof of concept, but like the next step forward of gene editing to cure all sorts of diseases and especially cancer, and also being able to use it in multiple ways. You even talked about, using messenger RNA to make a vaccine that covers everything. So you don't need to worry about stuff like that, and potentially even preventative medications for stuff like cancer. It's just a really, really cool idea. And specifically for this case, obviously there's this person's life involved. And whenever it gets to the point where it's no longer just a concept, it's no longer just an idea, but it's actually being put into practice in a situation where nothing else worked. And, that's just an amazing story. And technologically, it's way more cool than, 90% of the stuff that we get to talk about on a weekly basis, which is awesome, right? Because generally when you're talking about stuff in terms of tech, it's really iterative. Oh, there's a new iPad or there's a new iPhone, and every now and then we get something like the Apple Silicon processors, and people get blown away. But this is at a whole another level. This is at a completely different level of tech and kind of engineering. And yeah, I'm glad we could talk about it on the podcast because it's just really, really, really cool to see. Hopefully, we get more updates on how this kind of progresses, and hopefully all the updates are good and positive, and we can kind of see this become the proof of a very like favorable future in terms of curing and treating cancers and all other diseases going forward, kind of like a jumping off point, so to speak, of like where we could probably see things kind of skyrocket in terms of how we can use this technology to treat diseases.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely could be like a jumping off point, but it really just opens up the possibilities to so much more, right? If you think of diseases that civilization has suffered with, in terms of cancer or Alzheimer's or dementia or sickle cell or all kinds of different other things, right? If this is just the first step to treating those things, where it's like, oh well, there really is no cure, you just kind of have to live with it. And now it's like, well, no, now we don't have to live with these anymore. I think we could look back on this story about this 13-year-old girl, and like, yeah, this is kind of where it started, or this is where it got into the mainstream and became more popular.
I think that's an important thing to bring up too, because when we think about the traditional treatments, specifically in this case, like attempting things like chemotherapy is from the 1940s, right? And obviously, it's gotten much better and much more precise, but it's still something that we've come up, or humanity has come up with a long, long time ago. There's so many things or so many directions that this could go in terms of what's new, what is a new way to treat these things that is more effective, and not just resting on laurels. And I think this is a perfect example of what happens when in a tech way, but also just in a basic way of thinking outside the box and using something that isn't just something that's been around for decades, but actually coming up with something new and new ideas and new ways. I mean, that's the best part of tech, right? It's new, it's growing, it's changing the world, and this is like one of the best kind of examples of it.
Yeah.
So hopefully, we can look back and say, hey, 2022, 2020s in general, because there's been definitely a lot of advancements in CRISPRs in the 2020s. It's not just about, the pandemic. It's actually about, oh no, this is when we got huge advancements in medical technology, which is generally the case, right? Anytime there's a very dramatic kind of problematic event that happens in human history, there's usually some advancement that comes out of it. And hopefully, yeah, we in the decades to come, we can look back at this time of like, oh no, this was the jumping off point where things in terms of uh, treating people in the medical space really skyrocketed into something special.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess any closing statements for today?
I just wanted to give an extra shout out to another kind of aspirational idea, and that was the breakthrough recently in nuclear fusion. Um, there's been a step forward. Like, this is the thing, nuclear fusion has been talked about for a long time. I remember when I was a kid, it was like the most exciting thing, the idea of harnessing the power of the sun to get completely zero emission uh, kind of energy that was.
And then Chernobyl happened.
But it's just one of those things of like, it was supposed to be the perfect energy source.
Yeah.
And as years went on, it started to seem like, okay, no, this isn't possible. And it just kind of felt like, oh, okay, we were just spinning our tires. Like, this really isn't ever really going to work. But recently, major breakthroughs in nuclear fusion, that could potentially mean that, hey, this might actually be back on the table in terms of nuclear fusion actually existing and completely renewable energy, harnessing the power of the sun, no more, burning fossil fuels and stuff like that, for endless and abundant energy could potentially be in the future as well. So, I mean, something like hearing those two news stories in the same week with, this new base gene editing kind of cure for cancer, and the potential that nuclear fusion might also be on the table as well, is just like an awesome week in terms of news stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely overshadows the M2 Extreme
Yeah,
or Elon Musk for that matter.
true.
Yeah. Take it easy, everyone in podcast land.
Catch you in the next episode.